Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the July 11th, 2022 Michigan Peace Council membership meeting. And we've all decided that it's fun to have a discussion before our regular monthly meetings. And each month we've been addressing different serious issues that Peace Council works with and trying to have different guests and expand our networking here with people who also share similar views and are not with Michigan Peace Council. But we would love to have everyone join and work together. Um, my name is Bill Meyer. I'm the chair of the Michigan chapter of the U.S. Peace Council, and Linda Rayburn is on a list here. She's the co-chair with us, and Twyla Meyer is the treasurer, secretary-treasurer. Those are three officers. And today we're going to discuss the formation of Anti-Imperialist Coalition, and our two special guests are Jerry Goldberg from PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Sherry A. Wells, who is also, they're both with many groups, but Sherry's also with the Green Party. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to start out with a few comments, and then we'll invite Sherry to speak, and then Jerry will speak, and then we'll open it to everybody. So we hope that you all want to have questions, have points to make around this very serious, important issue. Like we've been trying to deal with this one in several different venues. So give me a few minutes to just introduce the subject, and then we're going to let Sherry speak. In August, we're going to do part 2 of a thing we started at Swords and Plowshares last month called Unite Against Imperialism. We had 6 different organizations be part of a panel discussion to talk about what their group is doing around the issue of imperialism and how we all can work together. And obviously there's more than 6 groups around town that are into this, so we're going to invite some other groups for part 2. And I think Jerry's group, PSL, is going to be part of that one, and a few other groups. That'll be on Sunday, August 14th in the afternoon, in person at the Swords and the Plowshares. That's a Sunday, 1 o'clock, same setup. We'll have a potluck before, and we'll spread the word on that. And if anybody wants to help work on that, please let us know. Okay, also we've had 2 anti-NATO rallies. That's been our latest focus, focusing on the NATO summit that took place in Madrid last week. And we all, probably most of us, know what came out of that. They just came up with new ways to have war and continue on the U.S. imperialist domination of the world. So I want to say here that we're trying to network with as many people as possible. I know we don't all agree on every issue by any means. That's certainly clear. My whole life, I know that. But we're all can find some common ground that we can relate to each other on. And I believe that we do have common ground around this issue of imperialism. It's a tough subject. The word itself is hard to define. Everybody defines it differently. So we're probably going to start out with a discussion of the definition. I think Sherry's going to focus on that. But I just want to make a point that all anti-imperialists are not communists. There's capitalists who are anti-imperialists. There was a anti-imperialist league that was formed in the end of the 1800s, I think around 1897, 6 of them, that formed an anti-imperialist league, and they were capitalists, and there's capitalists today and that are opposed to imperialism. And then it's also in reverse, all imperialists are not anti-communists. There are some imperialists who don't really charge against communists or socialists, and those two issues are on like 2 different spectrums. I call them spectrums or scales. The scale of imperialism, pro-imperialist, anti-imperialist, and capitalism, pro-capitalist, anti-capitalist. And at our last panel discussion, we had a big chart where everyone put a pin on the board and put where they thought they were ideologically, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, pro whatever. So these are 2 different things, although, as Lenin said and other people have said, that imperialism is just a higher form of capitalism. It's the last stage of capitalism. So we'll discuss that, I'm sure, in this discussion here. So also in our talk here, we want to focus on where our work needs to be. Where do you make change? It's like if you want to think about it, the kid that's got his thumb in the dike, and the water's coming through, and he puts his thumb in the dike. So, what do you do first to fix do you just keep your finger in there, or do you try to repair the wall, or you try to get rid of the water, or do I mean, how do you solve a problem? And the problem is imperialism, and who's going to bring down imperialism? U.S. imperialism. Is it going to be political parties that organize and found a way to do it, or coalitions like we were forming, or is it going to take countries in the world to do this, or international work to do this, and are we going to be able to influence the media and change the media to realize that imperialism is drastically dangerous and has destroyed the world? But we'll discuss that in this talk too. And maybe how is it going to be done? Maybe the de-dollarization that's happening right now. Maybe the concept of multipolarity that China's pushing and things like that. Uh, there's two books that influenced me a lot on this subject. And one is called How to Hide an Empire, and it was written by Daniel Immerwahr, Immerwahr. I'll put this in the chat. And then, of course, you probably all know An Indigenous People's History of the U.S. by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. That just opened my mind. It blew me away. I did not even realize that Irish people were colonized and they were discriminated against like blacks before that. So I mean, there's the whole concept of colonization in relation to imperialism. Um, the terminology of anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. The terminology is very tricky, and a lot of people don't want to use the word imperialism in the struggle because it's just too academic or not clear enough. So we have to define it for ourselves, and I'm sure all of us here have tried to clarify this, and hopefully some of you have something to add to the discussion to help us clarify it. So we're going to move on and start the discussion with Sherry A. Wells, who is a member of the U.S. Peace Council, and been very helpful with us, and very graciously took up the gauntlet at the last minute here and dropped everything else she was doing to participate in this event. So we're very grateful, Sherry, that you're willing to do this. So we're going to spend 10 minutes with Sherry and then maybe 10 minutes with Jerry, and we could talk to each other, the three of us here, if we have any questions about what we're saying. But mostly it's going to be Sherry now for about 10 minutes, and let's turn it over to you. Thanks for being here, Sherry.
I'm in charge of definitions. Merriam-Webster, imperialism is the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. So there's two different parts to it, and we'll get to both. Another synonym is empire. And so some of my research turned up the Mongol Empire in the 13th century, controlling the Silk Road trade route. The British Empire, the largest in the history, having up to a quarter of the globe and was in every continent. They didn't mention Hitler, but he had that as a goal. Interesting about the Russian Empire, said it was largest at 1895, but the 1917 revolution and 1991 reduced it. But Wikipedia said, the Russian Federation remains one of the few nations to pursue its goals through territorial conquest in the 21st century. That was the list. I think they're missing one. My recent reading took me to what I'd consider the first U.S. imperialism when it established the U.S. Army to, quote, move, remove, and exterminate if necessary, end of quote, the natives, so George Washington and other wealthy elites could take that land and sell it to make themselves even wealthier. Previously, I'd read the book, The Indigenous People's History of the United States. I could only read 4 pages at a time before I got physically ill. Bill regarded imperialism not starting until the United States went beyond its continental borders. So that started with Teddy Roosevelt in Cuba in 1898, the Spanish-American War, which is how we got Guam, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa was 1900, right along with all of that. Something said the Philippines was 1946 diplomatic relations. I didn't get further into that because that does not sound I haven't heard anything about being diplomatic with the Philippines. Now, every war since 9/11/2001, I would call a form of imperialism, and I'll get to what I would really rather call it. Colonialism was another definition. That's a practice or policy of control by one people or power over other people or areas. The colony idea is settlers frequently who do not see the natives as members of the same species. The economic dominance is a very important part of it currently. The Black Panther Party, through its newsletter, we're teaching political awareness that the United States was an imperialist force, not only in Vietnam, but also that it treated its Black population like a colony for 400 years. And when you look up colonialism and how the Blacks are still being treated, it's colonial. Now, capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. We have been hearing finally about wealth gaps, income inequality, and the 15-hour minimum wage. Those are really good signs. So are the unions creeping into Starbucks everywhere. In capitalism, money is more important than most people. The 2% are the important ones. I have found it interesting that in law school, they taught us that a contract, a valid contract, is between equal bargaining powers. Well, you don't get that with a corporation and an employee, but you can get it with a corporation and a union. And I saw a wonderful cartoon that showed the employer and the union. Without a union, the employer's on the teeter-totter at the bottom. With a union, that teeter-totter is level. I like that. Now, democracy, I see all of this: defend democracy, preserve democracy. We've never had it. If it's supposed to be of, by, or for the people, it started out with white male property owners. Not until the 20th century were rights slowly granted to other groups. I learned at the Thousand Swords and the Plowshares Gallery that the Chinese Americans and Asian Americans didn't get the vote until the middle of the 20th century. I was appalled. Mass incarceration almost always means the forever loss of voting rights. Only 21 states restore the right to vote upon release from prison. And then there's the Electoral College that does not give us one person, one vote. But today, the word imperialism, as Bill was suggesting, some think, I do, does not resonate. We had supposedly Wikipedia again. By the early 21st century, wars of territorial conquest were uncommon, and the world's nations could attempt to resolve their differences through diplomacy under global organizations like the United Nations. And the world's superpowers and potential superpowers rarely attempt to exert global influence through the territorial empire building that was historical. But the influence of those empires is still important, and the idea of world domination is still socially and culturally relevant. Seems to me the 1960s, and when most of us became aware of this imperialism and such, as I asked a friend when I was preparing this, she said younger people today are focused on survival. It may not be life or death in this country for the most part, but it's still making ends meet for far too many. I've begun to refer to extreme capitalism because I think they can relate to that. And now with, as I said, the unions invading Starbucks, that's such a good sign, because these are the younger people that we would like to have working with us, and we would like to work with them. Some of the economic domination that our country does, wars, we can't even keep track. I found out for Bill that the United States has not been a war in only 17 years since its start. Wars, blockades, Cuba, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Those are economic things the United States tries to bully the world with. So my world, my term for this, instead of imperialism, that I think people could relate, younger people could relate better to, is capitalist world domination. World domination is a hypothetical power structure, either achieved or aspired to, in which a single political authority holds the power over all or virtually all the inhabitants of the earth. And that power is our country and its almighty dollar. I could go in, I read stuff about the World Bank and I could go on. It's all appalling. This friend I talked with told me about a book called The Wretched of the Earth by psychiatrist Frantz Fanon and the dehumanizing effects of colonization. He proposed that revolutionaries, such as David and others, love to call themselves, should seek the help of the lumpen proletariat, which is apparently a Marxist term. And even though they're considered the most degraded stratum and lack the class consciousness, to participate in an anti-colonial revolution, and some of these are like the criminals, vagrants, and the unemployed. Fanon believes that they have sufficient intellectual independence from the dominant theology. They know it's not working. And they are ready to grasp that they can revolt against the status quo and decolonize the nation. Fanon highlights the necessity for each generation to discover its mission and fight for it. And that's what we want all these generations after ours to do, and we want this to somehow bring them all into the same mission. We can call it imperialism. Some people call it class struggle. I personally do not like the word class. I don't think there's any upper class, and I wouldn't call anybody lower class. I think we all got class, and everybody's working. Some just don't get paid, and they're most often called women. That's my contribution. Thank you for the opportunity. I learned more than I could stomach.
Sherry. All right, Sherry, thanks. And you came in right under the time limit, man. You were good. So that was good. All right. Thank you. So we're going to hear from Jerry now, and I'm going to present my thing after him, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. But before we go, I want to give Linda Rayburn and Twyla a chance to say something as officers in this organization before we go on. If there's something you wanted to say, you have the option now to speak in front of this group and say something about this organization, what we're doing. If Twyla or Linda would like to, just wave your hand if because you're officers of this group. No, you want to go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again for attending the meeting and sharing space together. Like Bill has said, we all come from different backgrounds, but we definitely agree with trying to find some sense of commonality, which is some form of peace. And so thank you, Sherry, for sharing your analysis and your opinions. And again, we all have subtle differences, but the main goal is for us to share and grow and hopefully build. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Linda, because I noticed you made some nice welcome in the chat, and I put the two books I mentioned in the chat for anyone interested in the titles. And so Linda has a right to welcome everybody to this organization, as she's one of the leaders, and Twyla too, if you want to say something.
No, I'm good. I agree with Linda. It's a struggle that we're all here for.
Okay. So before I introduce Jerry, our veteran activist who I've known for many decades, I just want to say a quote from Caitlin Johnstone, who is one of my very favorite writers. She's brilliant. She's full of acid and irony and sarcasm and everything. She's one of the most brilliant writers. So I'm going to say this just to stoke up the conversation, and then Jerry's going to speak. But on one of her daily blogs she's said that the difference between an anti-imperialist socialist and a Bernie Sanders progressive is far greater than the difference between a Bernie Sanders progressive and a Hillary Clinton liberal. So if you want to know what that, you got to think that one over. But that's quite a statement, and she's well aware of the ironies in the left. And the problem is in the left, and we're all in the left, folks, and we're going to agree with each other on some things and other things we're not. So that's definitely one of the hurdles we have to go get over is these differences that we have and find a way to work together with the things we do have in common. And now is Jerry Goldberg, who is also Jerry Goldberg, who's also a lawyer, an attorney, and longtime activist with Workers' World Party that I knew him from a long time ago. And whatever else he would like to introduce himself as. Jerry, we're so glad you could be with us. Take it over. You got it.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Bill. I appreciate the invitation. I'm currently working with Party for Socialism and Liberation. When I got the invitation, I thought of what I'd like to speak on is to kind of put the current events that we're facing and the period we're in a little bit of historical context. When I first became a revolutionary in the late 60s, it was a period when there was a tremendous upsurge in the anti-imperialist movement. And all over the world, the Vietnamese were defeating the US. In Africa, you had great movements going. And the characteristic of those movements, they almost all were led by socialists and communists. And that was the movement we were in. So Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique were liberated and became socialist countries. The Vietnamese beat the US, they were communists. And that was the characteristic of the movement. And it inspired my generation to move towards socialism and Marxism. Unfortunately, during that period, while the anti-imperialist struggle grew, the working class as a whole was not quite ready for a revolutionary perspective. And you didn't see revolutions in the more developed countries. You saw them really among the oppressed nations that were fighting for liberation. Following that period, though, several events happened that began changing the character of the struggle. Right afterwards, you had what had been an ideological struggle between the Soviet Union and China devolved into a state versus state struggle. And it weakened the unity of the socialist camp and pushed China in the direction of turning toward capitalists, opened the door much more to capitalism and playing less of a role in the anti-imperialist struggle. In the early 80s, Reagan did a tremendous military buildup to try to get after the Soviet Union. And the military buildup in the US, because the Soviet Union had to match it in order to survive, it took a tremendous toll on the Soviet Union, which had 1/3 of the economy, but having to spend a comparable military to the US. And eventually that played a major role, along with, of course, internal contradictions in leading to the collapse of the USSR in 1991. So in 1991, the USSR collapsed. China seemed to be turning toward capitalism. From the point of view of US imperialism, they won. It was the end of history. They thought it was a unipolar world. They actually produced a document then where basically they asserted their right to control the entire world, including every aspect of the world. And that's how they viewed the world at that time. But as things developed, it didn't quite go as they planned. You saw the US get defeated in Afghanistan. They got defeated in Syria. Iran was able to maintain its independence. The Iraq War wasn't quite the victory that they all hoped it would become. It became kind of a disaster. And moreover, China, even though China opened the door to capitalism, it didn't let capitalism take over the country. It used that capitalism, the technology that they brought in, and used it to develop its own socialist base. And I'm not saying that they don't have capitalist elements in China, but it's not a capitalist country. It's not under the control of the US, which they thought they had. And that's kind of the period that led it. And then what happened is in the more recent period, you began to see an alliance between Russia and China, not the same as the alliance between revolutionary China and the Soviet Union, which was based on socialist principle, but it was still an alliance that offered a counterpole to the unipolar world that the US believed they had. What did that mean? China now has the technology where it can aid developing countries that want to liberate themselves from imperialism. They're not dependent on the West. And Russia has become, by cooperating with China, they helped Syria defend themselves. And this is what threatens the US right now. And I think that's what is the core of the conflict. They want to go back to that unipolar world where US imperialism dominates every aspect of the world, and they view China and Russia as their impediment to do that. If you notice the NATO meeting that came out was a very aggressive meeting against the USSR, against Russia, not the USSR, unfortunately it's not the USSR, but against Russia. But also it had a whole section attacking China. What does NATO have to do with China? But it's because they view China as a threat. And I think that's the period we're in right now. We have to view the conflict in the Ukraine as a conflict really where the US and NATO are trying to reassert a unipolar world under the domination of US imperialism. And it's to the credit that so many countries have actually stood up to. Recently, Zelensky tried to set up a call with African nations. Only 4 nations out of 55 were willing to participate. Because developing nations, they want to have this counterweight to imperialism. They need it to develop, and that's really what's at the core. And that's why our duty to the people all over the world is to denounce US imperialism, to denounce this vision of a unipolar world, and to defend what's going on, to know what side we're on, that we're on the side of all those who are standing up to imperialism, because that's the only way people will be liberated. And I think another example we just saw of that was in Latin America. In Latin America, we had more of a growth of the socialist joint because Cuba held on with all the difficulties. It held on to revolutionary socialism. And now you just had this People's Summit where they call a People's Summit and excluded Cuba and Venezuela, but significantly Mexico didn't come. Bolivia didn't come. A whole slew of nations didn't come. It was really a disaster for US imperialism. I mean, I was proud of our organization that we helped organize a big People's Summit. So I think this is really the period we're in right now. We're in a period that we have to expose to people that we don't need a unipolar world that's dominated by US imperialism. We need a world where all people have the right to develop. They have the right to trade with whoever they want to. They have the right to develop, and we stand for that, and we stand for that principle, and we reject what imperialism is doing. And of course, we reject the idea that people all over the world, including in this country, that have to pay for this military buildup. I think I really believe that the tide is turning a little bit on this country. It hasn't within the Democratic Party, which has all stood together, but there's a lot of people that see that we're spending tens of millions of dollars, and there's no stop. There's no tens of, what did this a bill for 55 billion they spent so far, and they're spending more and more in weaponry at a time when social programs are being cut, when people are suffering in this country. And I think that more and more people are getting tired of this. People are not for it. I know I spoke in Benton Harbor at a rally on water a few weeks ago, and I was surprised that 3 speakers got up and denounced the bill that had just passed funding the U.S. war and the U.S. funding to the Ukraine, and I wasn't one of them. It was 3 rank and file speakers got up because they were disgusted with what they see. So anyway, that's really the point I want to make here. I think we have to put this in its context. Well, unfortunately, we're still not at a period where revolutionary socialists are leading the movement like it was when I came in, but it's going to move in that direction. But right now, our task is to defend, to oppose imperialism, to defend of the right of all nations to trade with whoever they want to get the development from wherever they want to reject the idea that the U.S. has the right to put its will and its domination, because we know the U.S. never just trades with a country. When it trades with a country, it dominates that country. It puts them in loans, just like they did to Detroit, that can't be paid. Then they renegotiate that loans by privatizing everything, putting it in the hands. We've seen it in Detroit. What they've done to oppress people around the world isn't a whole lot different than what they've done to our city here in Detroit. We especially know it. And we know that's their vision for the world. And we reject that vision. We're for our vision where people can work in a unified way for the benefit of humanity. And we stand with Russia and China to the extent that they've stood up to U.S. imperialism. And especially, I think we got to pay attention to that. And we should look at the next big war. They're looking to go after China because they view what China, the kind of threat China plays to development. So anyway, that's really what I want to say. And I think we should have confidence in our ability to build this coalition. I think they're weakening. I really feel their coalition is not as strong as it was. I think there's some sympathy in the U.S. for this war is going down. I think it's getting, people are tired of it. They don't want to hear about it. What they want to hear about is how to pay their gas bills. Is how they have, have to deal with the conditions that we face every day in Detroit. It means having affordable water, not having 35,000 evictions every, and to say we need the funds not to be spent for war abroad, but spent to fight for the needs of the people right at home. And we reject this unipolar world of the U.S., which really is a world dominated by U.S. multinational corporations who exploit all of us every day. So I'll end there.
Jerry, thank you so much. That was right on time too, and very filled with a lot of ideas. This, folks, we all know that this is just a short discussion here before a meeting. It's not a major conference or panel discussion, so we're going to try to cram a lot of ideas in this short amount of time. And we want to hear from everyone who wants to say something. I'm going to present a little thing, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. But Sherry, did you want to respond to Jerry? Is that what your hand's up for?
Yeah, by the time she was a teenager, my daughter already knew her country was a bully. I didn't know I spouted that much. She's 31 now, so she's one of the generations we're going after. Until Bill was talking about NATO, I never paid that much attention to it. Most people I talked to since then really just think, well, NATO just is. When I started looking it up and I found out it was the US, Canada, and certain European nations called the West. Well, we have the West, we have the East, we have the South, but the West, the small group of white European peoples and US and Canada are all part of this whole thing. And that's why I showed up in the median at 9 and Woodward with Bill and other people. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sherry. Yeah. So I'm going to just throw out a few more ideas, and then we're going to open it up to whatever anybody wants to say. Uh, so our purpose of the short discussion was 3 point. One was to define certain terms like what is imperialism, socialism versus communism. If we could have talked about that, I don't think we addressed that. Colonialism was mentioned in relation to imperialism. Um, Anti-war movement as opposed to an anti-imperialist movement. What's the difference? That was like the first area of discussion. The second area was how does imperialism, U.S. imperialism, affect our own economy and our own social programs in the U.S. And certainly that's a focus on how our coalition can work to show people who are not convinced about the dangers of imperialism is that they're spending billions, trillions of dollars on war and weapons, and it's the weapons manufacturing corporations who are making the profits, and our economy and our social programs are going down the tube. There's an organization called Move the Money. That's one of the campaigns that the U.S. Peace Council is involved in. And there's another one called Kill the Sanctions. It ends up hurting us and the people more than it does the countries that they are trying to sanction. So that was the second area of discussion. The third area, which we didn't touch on at all, which is very critical, is how Western media is utilized to divide, well, first of all, propagandize war. And not only that, it's used to divide the left on imperialism. I mean, the left are people that can be influenced by multimedia and I mean Western media, mass media, just like anyone else. A lot of us watch the mainstream news and think like actually some of that is true and stuff like that. There's not only overt attempts to influence the left and split it into an anti-communist left. It's also to actually to overthrow the left in a sense, to divide it and gain more support for imperialism. So I think the left has to be aware of that, and we have to focus on that on one of our programs, one of our events, whatever. So the other question was how do we bring down and how do we help end U.S. imperialism? And I mean, certainly discussing it like this and helping people understand what the problem is and all that is certainly one way of doing it. But we did mention, like I said earlier, that the U.S. dollar is losing influence in the world, and that itself might bring down U.S. imperialism, regardless of how hard we all work to change it. That might do it itself. There's many factors going on in the world now that are challenging the Western hegemony and world domination, and one of them is certainly the financial use of like it's almost like blackmail. The U.S. uses the U.S. dollar as blackmail, and they control all the money in many countries. And once people get off the U.S. dollar, it's going to change, and it's starting now. It's the first major threat. So I just want to quote a couple quotes before I open it up here. And this is from a guy named Mike Gimbel, who wrote a little essay online called "What is Imperialism?" It's a long thing. I'm only going to read a short part of it, and it's very valuable to read. Mike Gimbel, Gimbel. he did make a point that Marxism, for example, distinguishes capitalist imperialism based upon the commodity exchange system from like the Roman imperialism, which is based on slavery. There's different kinds of imperialism, of course. And just having 850 U.S. military bases all over the world is not the definition of modern imperialism. That's not what it is, although that is a characteristic of U.S. imperialism. He says, he asks a question about the Russian-Ukrainian war. Is Russia a member of the imperialist alliance, which some people think it's an imperialist power? No, in no way, he says. Is Russia capitalist? Yes. Capitalist Russia and capitalist Iran are both targets of U.S.-led imperialism. If they are capitalist, then why are they targets of U.S.-led imperialism? Well, they are targets simply because their national bourgeoisies refuse to allow their nations to be colonial subjects. They don't have to be a communist country for the U.S.-led imperialism to go after. I mean, it went after other capitalist countries too. So this last quote is very important. While the Soviet bloc existed for how many, 70 years, 87 years, I can't remember, countries such as Iraq, Syria, and Yugoslavia that were protected by the existence of the mighty Soviet military power. We all remember that time with the threat of MAD, mutual assured destruction. So, I mean, if either one of them pulled the trigger, it would be the end of the world for all of us. But when the USSR was overthrown in 1991, is it any surprise that Iraq was invaded that very same year by US-led imperialism? The Soviet Union was the inspiration not only of communist revolutions, but colonial revolutions as well. Those colonial revolutions, for the most part, were led by national bourgeoisies. The USSR defended those anti-colonial revolutions that were led by their national bourgeoisies. The Russian national bourgeoisie is progressive in that they are fighting to defeat US-led imperialism. In that sense, they're progressive. So that's a different way of looking at that. And the US dollar is a crucial financial instrument of US imperialist power, is this what Mike Gimbel agrees on. And many people I read and listen to are talking about the dollar and the de-dollarization as one of the most critical aspects of the upcoming challenge to US imperialism. So with that said, we have time for people to speak, and all you got to do is put your hand up like this, or you can put your hand icon up, say something, or you can put your name in the chat, stack, whatever way you want to. And we'd love to hear from all of you. So let's start with Tobin. And hi, Tobin. How are you doing?
Hey, pretty good. Thank you. And thank you for everybody and for sharing Jerry for that those wonderful introductory talks right there. I've so I was listening. I'm thinking about something that troubles me about the characterization of the West. And one of those things that was brought up to my attention, I forget who, is that the West really only comprises like a tiny portion of it right there. And not everybody who's a friend of the global West is actually in the Western Hemisphere. And I was reminded about after Abe's assassination in Japan, Japan's been basically the guard dog for U.S. imperialism in the Pacific right there. They dropped their Article 9 of their Constitution, which is actually put in there by the U.S. They dropped that non-belligerence pact right there, which allowed them to aim long-range missiles at North Korea, among other things, too. So there's still a viable threat, but if that concept of the West is actually a fairly diverse conglomeration of nations right there too. I throw that out just for food for thought. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And I think at the UN, when they did the vote and the U.S. said they have the worlds behind them and all this stuff, they're talking about the countries that supported them were really represented like less than 1/3 of the world's population, the countries. There's coalitions in the East like that are opposing U.S. imperialism, like BRICS, which is a very large organization, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And I think there's two more that are going to be joining on soon. I know, I think Iran is one of them considering it, and Venezuela. No, Argentina. Argentina wants to be in BRICS. So, I mean, they're forming coalitions. We see it in the world. But like we talked about earlier, multipolarity has to be the solution. The unipolar world is not going to happen. It's not going to survive anymore. It's either the end of the world or multipolarity. I don't know what the option we have. Anyways, love to hear anybody say anything, speak, questions, whatever you want. Just raise your hand and go to it. Renee. Okay, Renee. Hang on, I'll turn on your mic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say the idea of a Detroit kind of anti-imperialist coalition, I think it's a really great idea. It's really important. It's needed, and it's the kind of forum where we could do, education on all of these subjects that we're discussing now. So I think we should hang on to that idea, and I think it's possible to do that, to have some kind of Detroit area wide or Michigan wide anti-imperialist coalition. In terms of the definitions, they're it's to me, it's always been, imperialism has always been an extension of capitalism. It's just exported to include the world's other countries that the U.S. has colonized. I also would not use at all this "we" business, and I wouldn't even use the word the United States. I would have to say, I really think the idea of classes and who the enemy is in the United States is extremely important. And so, out of the what was it? The Occupy movement came this concept of the 1%. So it's been enlarged to the 10%. But people know what that means. They don't. We don't need a big definition. They know it's the corporations. They know it's General Motors, and they know it's not them. And that includes, people like where I live, which is these mostly white suburbs where people. If you talk about imperialism in terms of here, people have 2-3 cars, for God's sakes. It's like, well, how is this imperialism hurting us? Well, you have to say, you have to talk about the 1% or the 10%, and you have to talk about the kind of empire that we have where we benefit. We white people in these suburbs, benefit from all of this, and we don't really feel this oppression, many of us, directly the way they do in the third world. So I think if we're going to talk about U.S. imperialism, we got to talk about the people have mentioned the corporations, and the 1% or 10%. People understand that kind of language. In terms of the dollar right now, I for one, I have no idea what the hell that's going to mean, or how to explain it to anybody. What I do understand is that the U.S. empire is going downhill, and I'm saying what a lot of historians and observers are saying now, that the century or the period of the U.S. empire from the end of World War II, which I remember distinctly NATO being formed, etc. The end of World War II, when the U.S. became, the only remaining country, and now now the U.S. empire is going downhill, and people are saying, look, it's China and its influence in Southeast Asia with those BRICS country that we're talking about. And I've seen a map of Europe, white colonial Europe, next to a map of the world, and this white colonial Europe with all these ex-empires, Portuguese and British and French, which I experienced in French Empire, with Indochina or Vietnam, and the German Empire, the Belgian, they're gone, right? After World War II, they were all gone. And these empires that we've talked about, including the Tsarist Empire, Russia, they evaporated, and these countries became these little nothing countries. Great Britain, England is like, nothing. And England and France, of course, they still have these illusions of grandeur, but they're nothing without their colonies. No, the action, I think, is going to be in terms of China and what China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Which is really, I mean, think that the United States is not doing anything like that. They can't even get their own roads. Right here in Oakland County, we can't get roads. And China is so China is, I think we have to talk about what China has been doing for its people for the last 30 or 40, 50 years. We've been bombing all over the world, and they've been feeding their own people. So that's my contribution.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Renee. That was great. Cameron is next online. Hi, Cameron, my neighbor. Go ahead. I think you can unmute. Oh, you can unmute yourself. Shit, where? I got to change that. Hang on. Unmute. Okay, people. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. You should be able to. No? All right, let's see. Let me try it again. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Go ahead. Oh, what happened now? It went off again. Okay, I'm unmuting you there.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, there it is. Good.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to bring in, like, I guess the question, right, is how do we organize and how do we expand and bring people into motion to resist imperialism? And off the top of my head, one way I think we can really do that is, so a couple of weeks ago, I went to Washington, D.C. with the Poor People's Campaign. It was a mass, mobilization. There was unions there. There was people's forces, unity between labor and people's movements. And also there's very large contingents from both the PSL and the CPUSA. In fact, I think they were the only two large political party organizations there, in addition to the Women for Peace, the Code Pink group. And I think just getting involved in mass movements and bringing that anti-imperialist, position, and I guess exposing the contradictions that are happening. And I even think Reverend Barber is doing that, and the Poor People's Campaign is doing that. They spent a lot of time in talking about the war economy and kind of the Pentagon, and it's just making sure these struggles advance and reach a higher consciousness to where they're not only opposing war, but they're opposing capitalism, because capitalism is what is causing war. And then just one last point is Jerry brought up what was happening in Latin America. And I just want to say that really goes to show that US imperialism truly is a paper tiger, because you got the US State Department still like puppeteering this Juan Guaido guy, when half the time most Venezuelans still don't know about this guy. Then they try to throw a false color revolution at our comrades in Cuba a year ago today, which went nowhere. So it's just like Jerry said, with instead of the Summit for Americas, we have a People's Summit, and US imperialism is a paper tiger. People are waking up. We just have to be there and give truth to what people are already feeling. We have low wages, our water's getting shut off, we're getting evicted, much like Jerry said. Just wanted to second that and really push that perspective forward. So thank y'all. Yeah,
great points. Thank you, Cameron. You did raise the point about the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, and this is an important project that carries on Martin Luther King's thing and all that. But it was overwhelmingly underreported in the media. I mean, very, very little coverage of this. And that's how the media is controlled. This is a very important area we have to work in. We have to take back control of the media and find some way to get our ideas and our words out. We're being stomped by, of course, fighting capitalists are people with money, and it takes money to do things. So poor people fighting rich people pretty much says right away what's going to happen. But you can do things without a lot of money. Thank you, Cameron, for your input. Anyone else want to say anything? David Smokler. Okay, let me unmute. There you go.
I think it's great that we're pulling left forces together, and we should pull as many as we can. But there's a lot of social organizations that claim to be very progressive, Michigan Council on Human Rights, whatever. I think that we might want to invite some of them and see if they will take a position on being anti-imperialist, because there are this thing called the synthetic left, and whatever. And this the fact that all these foundation money is funding a lot of the so-called progressives. So I think if we invite after we exhaust the left groups, if we began to invite the progressive, so social organizations, and identify ourselves as anti-imperialists and see what happens. Thank you.
That's a very good point, David, and I totally agree with you. And if anyone here wants to help try to suggest other groups or organizations, how we can expand, of course we have to expand. And our next forum in August 14th, we're still open for some groups. So if you have ideas for groups you think should be added to this discussion, and MCHR is certainly one to consider. Peace Action, I don't think they spoke at the last panel discussion, and Richard Peacock was on with us here a minute ago. He's not with us now, but we could talk to them. But Peace Action, by the way, is there's different chapters. The one in Connecticut is very anti-imperialist, very anti-imperialist. Each chapter seems to have different positions on that, so I'm curious exactly how far the local Peace Action goes with that. But okay, we got Jerry's hand up, and then Michelle's. Go ahead, Jerry.
I'd like to be brief. One thing I think when we're operating in Detroit is, in a way, we have a particular history in Detroit, because in many ways, Detroit itself is an oppressed nation. It's a Black city. It was a city that was really the leading force, really, in the Black liberation movement, where the Black struggle united with the worker struggle through the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And we were the first city to have a Black mayor and a progressive city council, the first city where a cop got convicted of murder. And what happened to Detroit? They deliberately dismantled Detroit. That's really what happened. No different than they did to Iraq. We had sanctions on our city. They shut all the factories in Detroit, all the Chrysler plants, to eliminate the power of Black workers in Detroit in a 3-year period. They put no jobs in Detroit for a period. And then when Detroit finally stabilized, the banks came in with an austerity plan. It's no different than what they're doing in Latin America. I did a tour in Puerto Rico, which compared Puerto Rico to Detroit, because they took everyone. They took 65,000 homes by the banks, and then they put the city into a bankruptcy. I raise all this to say that we can link up the struggle in Detroit and the history of Detroit to the fight against imperialism. Imperialism isn't just some abstraction around the world. It's very alive within the US, and especially against oppressed people within the US. And Detroit, if anywhere, is a symbol of what they've done to people. And really the only way Detroit is going to really be rebuilt is by forcing these banks and corporations to pay reparations and putting them in the hands of the working class who will rebuild the city. And I do think these are ideas that we can popularize. And really, I think people know it. A lot of people, we shouldn't underestimate the consciousness of the masses, which in many ways is ahead of a lot of the so-called social groups that are getting funded by the corporations, because the people deal with it. And I really feel that these are ideas that we have a particular way to popularize in Detroit, to say we are victims of imperialism as well. We understand imperialism. We understand finance capital, because we've expressed the brunt of it here, and we're prepared. And our struggle is the same struggle that's being fought by oppressed people all over the world.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And I apologize to Noah. I didn't see your hand up. And I see now it's yellow and it's in front of a color behind that sort of blurred it out, so I didn't see your hand up. You should have been next. And then Michelle. I'm sorry, Michelle, too. Noah's going to speak now. And he had his hand up first. Asked on you. There you go, Noah.
Yeah, no worries at all. And actually, Jerry touched on some of that. I think a lot of people, maybe I sometimes don't give them enough credit for, that they already sort of understand this stuff. Bill, like you were saying, we're all on the left, but I think global affairs, it's a great opportunity to reach people that are maybe outside of the left. There's a lot of people that kind of intuitively understand the idea of staying out of other countries' business. And even a majority of Republicans in polling, they say they'd like to be less active in world affairs. You add in the amount of money that we're spending in Ukraine on a regular basis, and I think it becomes a really easy argument to make for most people.
Yeah, you're right, Noah. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that all anti-imperialists are not communists. There's capitalist anti-imperialists for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, we could get a bigger group, and we just have to start doing something somewhere, and we're starting. So anybody can branch out, please. And Michelle, who has branched out for many years, by the way, she's been an activist for a long time, and we're so glad you're with us, Michelle. She actually founded the Michigan Peace Council, the first one back in the '80s. Hi, Michelle.
Hey there, Bill. Uh, Following up on what Noah said and Jerry also, I think that we mistakenly feel that you have to be a socialist to oppose what's going on in this country. And I would like to see us reach out to people who aren't socialists and who don't know anything about imperialism other than they feel that this country is not serving the needs of them, their family, people around them, in education, in the economy, in the roads, in how we vote. And I know just with my birthday party that we celebrated yesterday, for those of you who don't know, there were about 50 people at it. And people were talking politics who I didn't know knew anything about politics, but they were angry with the cost of living and the cost of gas and the money that's going to the military, because that money is their money. It's tax money that is going to support wars all around the world, and they want it back to do the things that need to be done. And I'd like to see the Peace Council spend time organizing around some of those issues, and as we go, give it a name. But we don't have to give it a name before people understand what it is. And I don't think all of the teach-ins and lectures and discussions are going to change people's minds until we're dealing with the things that affect them.
Yes, Michelle, I think we all can agree with that. And for those of you who are members, please stick around for our meeting because we're going to discuss exactly those points. We have a couple ideas for upcoming events besides part 2 of the panel discussion. We're also planning some sort of a picnic kind of a thing among people who are upset with military spending and other things that don't have to say imperialism. Yes, please stick around and be part of this group if you can. This is how we can expand and grow in our work. And if you can volunteer for anything with this group to help us, we need help, and we'll talk about what we need in the meeting if you can stay for that. Cameron was on stack in the list. You want to say something, Cameron? You're next. Nope, that was not that. Okay. All right. Anyone else?
Thanks for the invitation. It was a pleasure getting to participate with all you guys.
Okay. Well, then we're going to close out this part of the discussion. Of course, we didn't solve the problem, but we did talk about what we got to do. Some of the things. And some of us have been doing it for a long time, and we still have to do it. So maybe there'll be a major change coming. That's why I really think it takes nation states, too, to work on this, and they are. I mean, China, just at the size that they are, will not put up with U.S. imperialism anymore. And they're much more powerful than any group that we have here. And something's going to change, whether we have anything to do with it or not. I hope we do. But U.S. Peace Council has been around a long time, and they're a member of the World Peace Council, which has been around since the 40s. And we're just a chapter of the U.S. Peace Council and trying to do whatever work we can do around here in Michigan. And all of you are parts of a member of groups, 1, 2, 5, 10 groups, whatever. We all like to fill in whatever time we have trying to change the world and fix it. So if you got a minute or two that you can share with the U.S. Peace Council and Michigan chapter, we would love to have you be part of it. Sherry's going to say something here. Go ahead, Sherry. Oh, I unmuted you. I thought there you go.
Okay. It just came. It's coming and going, which is just really annoying. We're talking about. I'm going to write it down so that I remember it next time.
Oh, you forgot it. Okay, fine. All right, so thank you for joining us for the discussion. Next month we'll have another discussion to carry on, but we'll also, if you hang around for a meeting, you'll discover we're trying to probably put on some event in July before our next meeting. And then maybe for sure, part 2 of the Unite Against Imperialism at Swords and Plowshares. We already have the room reserved, and we need help on everything. So don't be shy to volunteer. If you can help us, please step forward. Not even the money. I mean, we got enough money to go for another few months, and we're going to have to talk about a fundraiser. Maybe that's what one of these events might be. So I want to tell you once again what a thrill it is to have a room full of people who I know who are activists and are progressives and having a discussion like this. This just excites me and makes me feel very, very powerful and hopeful. I guess the word. We need allies, and you guys are all allies. And we thank you so much for being part of this. We're going to close out the recording right now. So thank you very much. This is the end of the discussion.